Now let us look at the contributions of the dynasties to the growth of the Chinese civilization. What role did the different dynasties play in order for the Chinese civilization to grow? So number one, we are going to look at the Shang dynasty. So the Shang dynasty, it was there between 1776 to 1045 BC, 1776 to 1045 BC. So it was the first dynasty under a mythical king. So it was ruled by a mythical king whereby it is not really known to say, was this man really the king? Because much is attributed to that one. So they controlled the northern China. So the Shang controlled the northern China. And it is known for the fine bronze work. So they were the people who were working on bronze, and their bronze was very, very fine. And it was founded by the Chinese people called the Shang. So it was called the Shang dynasty because it was founded by the people called the Shang. So rulers combined both religious and political duties. So a ruler, the leader or the emperor had religious and political powers. Their good rule enabled the ideas to spread to other parts of China. So the Shang, if you go back to that map, you see to it that uh, they ruled a very wide area. So the reason was that they had good ideas, they had good rule. The Shang dynasty was based on Anyang. Anyang was the major city at that time, Anyang. So it was founded by Pian Keng around 1384 BC, and consisted of the walled city surrounded by the villages. So we're talking of the Anyang as the capital city, which was founded in 1384 by Pian Keng. The city was built mainly of wood. So we are talking of this Anyang was built of wood. So it stood on large rectangular wooden houses with thatched roofs, while average families lived in little cone-shaped huts or pit houses. So the city itself, it was really in wooden and rectangular houses with thatched roofs, but other people, they were living in conical huts and the pit houses. And also a palace and a temple stood at the center of that city, Anyang, while the public buildings and homes of the nobles encircled the royal building. So the royal building was at the center, and it was surrounded by the houses of the nobles, and other public buildings. And homes of government officials, they encircled the royal sanctuary. So the royal sanctuary, it was surrounded by the homes of the government. Now, what has the Shang dynasty contributed, or what did it contribute to the Chinese civilization? Number one was the government itself. So it created a simple government. The Shang dynasty created a very simple government. It was made up of a king who gave land to his principal followers. So the king was giving land to his followers. So the followers, in return, they pledged to be royal and performed certain services and paid the tribute to the king. So during Shang dynasty, the people believed that the ruler symbolized the direct rule between the people and the heaven, and that one, it was called the mandate from heaven. So that one was called the mandate from heaven. So what was it? It was a direct link between the people the people and heaven. Hence, it was called the mandate from heaven. So it was believed that their gods give their rulers the mandate to rule the people. So they believed that it was the gods who were giving the ruler the mandate to rule. So what was happening was that the mandate was withdrawn on the other hand if the leader has failed. So if the leader has proved to be a very bad leader and people are complaining now and again, then they believe that that mandate was being withdrawn from that ruler. So when the mandate from heaven was still in force, the kingship would be inherited along the family line. So when the mandate from heaven was still there, if the king dies, then his son comes in. But if the mandate is withdrawn, then that line, it was the end of that line to say, no, this family, they can no longer be the leaders because the mandate from heaven has been withdrawn. And also the kings continued to rule even after death. So even after death, the kings, they continued to rule because they believed that it was the mandate from heaven that was ruling and not the individual himself. So they believed in the mandate itself, the authority from heaven, and not the personality. So they were surrounded by their bodyguards and slaves who were often buried alive with them. So the kings continued to rule, but usually wherever there is the king, they were surrounded by their bodyguards and some slaves. And even after they die, they were buried alive with them. Those bodyguards and slaves who were usually walking with the king, they were buried alive with them to symbolize the end of that leadership and all who were with him. So the slaves, his slaves and bodyguards. Economy was another contribution of the Shang dynasty to the Chinese civilization. Number one, we are saying that the Shang economy was based on agriculture. So the Shang, they based on their economy on agriculture. So they were growing millet, rice, barley. Those were the crops that they used to grow. And they were taming the animals like cattle, horses, sheep, pigs, and chicken. So these were some of the animals that they were keeping. And they were also keeping dogs, were also there. And the Shang, they also used elephants. They were using the elephants for the battle and the other works. And they also learned to spin the thread from the silkworm, which they raised. So they were keeping the silkworms in order to get the threads from there, from the inside. Then they were making the silk from there. The cloth were made from there. So the silkworms were the small insects that were making the silk. So they were getting the silk. So for the Chinese, they were raising those silkworms. They were taming them so that at the end they will get that silk to make cloth. They also produce cloth from the cocoons thread from the worms. That is what we are talking about the silkworms. The cocoons themselves, they were making the threads, and those threads, they were used for making silk. They also conducted trade. The Shang were good traders. They traded in jewelry, ivory, bones, silk, and cord cloths. They also traded in pottery from kaolin clay, and bronze castings. So they were also making bronze. Remember, we just mentioned that they were making very fine bronze. So they also imported copper, tin, and even they were making the alloy. So all these are minerals that were they were making or working on. They made various items from these metals. So the metals like copper, tin, alloy, they were making different metals like the daggers, they were making the figurines, they were making the ritual urns, the massive ceremonial cudrons standing on the legs. So they were making different shaping different things. So there were those things that were made for war, others were made for general duties, others were made for maybe ceremonials or for religious purposes. So these objects were used as weapons and in religious rituals, while others were served as symbols of power. So all those things that they were making, they were for religious purposes, and they were also used as weapons and also for to symbolize power. The shapes that they were making, they were symbolizing power, other things. Now, also astronomy is the other contribution of the Shang dynasty, astronomy and the calendar. So their calendar was based on the movement of the moon, on the movement of the moon. So that is the lunar calendar as well, just as it was with the Egyptians. So periods in their calendar were made up of 10 days. 10 days. So 6 10-day period made up a cycle. 6 10-day period made up a cycle. So like 60 days they were making a cycle. So of which six cycles made up a year. 6 cycles make up a year of 360 days. So you see, they were making a cycle of, they made up a calendar of 10 days. 10 days, a calendar. So that 10 days, they were making a cycle. So 6 10 days, they were making one cycle. So they also had the 6 cycles. One cycle, one cycle, one cycle, one cycle. It comprised of 60 days. So 6 times 6, it was 360 days. So that's 360 days. It was a year to the Chinese. So some astronomers also predicted the eclipse of the moon. So they also predicted the eclipse of the moon. And also they kept official documents which made the Chinese to have official history. So their calendar is still being used up to date. So let us look at the social stratification. The social stratification of the Shang dynasty. The Shang, they had the following classes in their dynasty. So they had the royal family, they had the nobles and the commoners and the slaves. So commoners and slaves, they were into one category uh, of the lowest. The commoners, after the commoners, then they were the slaves. So the nobles, they owned land and served in the army and the government, and uh, they were also looking after the villages, different villages in different areas. So those were the nobles. While the commoners, they were the ones who were tilling the land. They were using the wooden hoes, and again they were using the sickles that were made of stones. And they planted twice a year, and they got very high harvest. So the special group was formed by the artisans who lived also outside the city, who were living outside the city. So there was a special group that was living outside the city of artisans. So the artists were artists, they were doing different things. And also there were the merchants or the traders. So these merchants, they were exchanging, they exchanged food and crafts made by the local artisans that we have mentioned. So they're exchanging those things for salt. They were exchanging those things for salt, cowrie shells, and the other goods as well. And the peasants, these ones, they were the majority, and they led a very grueling life, a very, very pathetic life. So all family members of the peasants, they worked in the fields, and they were repairing the dikes, and also fighting in times of war alongside the nobles. So you can see the peasants, that's why we are saying that they were living a gruesome life, and they lived in poor standard houses, those that were thatched by grass, and again they were also living in pit houses whose earthen floors were dug several feet below the surrounding ground. So sometimes their houses were underground. They were just digging underground, and they could make a space there for living. And also another class was the class of the slaves, the ones who participated in manual labor, that is the slaves. Another contribution of the Shang is the language and writing. Language and writing. So they developed the ideograms or phonograms. So this one, it made many of their written characters to be made up to two parts. So their written characters were into two parts. The other one was the idea sign. The idea sign, which gave a clue to the meaning of the characters. When they have written something, they were indicating the idea sign to say, all right, on this idea, the clue is this one of what is being meant. And the other one was a phonetic or sound sign. And this one, it was showing how to pronounce that character that was written. So the Chinese, they wrote on animal bones and the tortoise shells. So they were writing on animal bones as well as the tortoise shells. That's where they were writing. Remember the Egyptians, we said they were writing on papyrus. But for the Chinese, they were writing on the animal bones as well as the tortoise shells. The objects were called the oracle bones on which they were writing. They were called the oracle bones because they were the priests who used them to foretell the future. So these materials are on the Shang priests. They wrote the questions and they addressed those ones to the gods or the spirits of an ancestor. So after writing, then they could hit that bone or that shell until it cracked. So those priests, they were just interpreting the pattern of cracks in there. Then they provided the answers or advice from the gods. So that's what was happening there. So the Chinese language acted as the unifying force in the kingdom of the Shang. So here in the picture, what you see here is a mirror or oracle bone. We have said that they were writing on tortoise shells or bones. So this one is one of the examples of it. Another thing that we have to look at about the Shang dynasty is the religion. So the religion, it combined animism as well as ancestor worship. So people believed in a powerful dragon that lived in the seas and rivers and could rise up into the clouds. So they believed that when the dragon are fighting in heavens, they caused the thunderstorms, which brought rain. So the dragon became the symbol of the Chinese rulers. So even today, when you see most of the festivals in the Chinese, they are the dragons, things like that. So it is from that. So the great festivals were done in spring and autumn during the planting and harvest time. So during the planting season, the ruler or the king himself, he plowed. He was the first one to dig the ground to ensure that good crops in the kingdom, to ensure good crops in the kingdom for that year. So during harvest, the people thanked the gods for the harvest. So that's what happened on religion. They believed much on the dragons. And also, they believed in life after death, just as the Egyptians. So, kings were buried together with their possessions, which included the servants, slaves, and other earthly possessions. So, they believed that the king would need the services of such things. So, he was buried together with all his possessions. So, the Shang kings were also priests. That is, they communicated with nature deities on behalf of the people. So the kings were also taking the responsibility of priests. So kings also prayed. They were also making the offerings, sacrifices in order to elicit good harvest, to induce good harvest, or a change in weather or a victory in the battle. So kings were leaders in matters of religion. And the Shang developed a complex religious beliefs that is of a belief of many gods, polytheism. Uh, the chief among them was the Shangdi. Shangdi. So this Shangdi was the mother goddess who brought plants and animals to death. So the king was a link between the people and Shangdi. So the people were linked to this goddess through the king. So the kings were, as we have said, that they were taken as also the priests. They were taken as the priests who were also pleading on behalf of the people. There was a strong belief that the gods could be approached by the living through the ancestors of the rulers. So they believed that the ancestors of the kings, they are the ones who can be worshipped through to the gods. So it was due to this reason that prayers offered to the gods through the rulers and nobles were believed to save the whole community. So prayers were always offered through the rulers as well as the nobles, because they believed that the ancestors of the rulers are the ones who can be held to the gods. So they were praying through the nobles as well as the rulers. So sacrifices were offered to the ancestors to appease them. So usually they were appeasing the ancestors by offering the sacrifices to them. So they also believed that the universe reflected a balance between the two forces. So they believed in the two forces that were a balance of the universe. So these ones were the yin, one was the yin, and the other one was the yang. So the yin was linked to the earth, darkness, and the female forces. So the earth darkness as well as female forces, they were the yin. That was to the side of the yin. And the yang, it stood for the heaven, light, and male forces. So the earth and the darkness, they were the female forces. And again, the other force was the yang. It stood for the. Now let's look at the fall. What led to the fall of the Shang dynasty? So the Shang dynasty came to an end around 1045 BC. So basically, it was expansionist policy of the Shang dynasties or rulers. It led to the vulnerability of invasions by other Chinese tribes. For example, the Zhou led a rebellion against the Shang rulers, and they conquered them. So they argued that the Shang had lost the mandate from heaven. Remember, the mandate from heaven. So when the Zhou came in, they said, no, these people, the Shang, the rulers, they have lost the mandate from heaven. Hence, we no longer need to be under them. So they said the Shang king was a monster of corrupt wickedness and cruelty. So they said, no, 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 we need not to follow this or this dynasty. So even the Shang army supported the Zhou. So they ushered the next dynasty, and that was the Zhou dynasty. And this Zhou dynasty, it brought by it was brought by less civilized group that was more warlike. So these Zhou people, although they claimed that the mandate of heaven has left the Shang, but themselves were just the warlike people. So they were less civilized people, the Zhou dynasty. Although they defeated the Shang, but themselves again they were just the war. So let us look at the Zhou dynasty, the Zhou or Chao dynasty. So it was there between 1045 and 221 BC. So it lasted for about 800 years. So it originated along the Wei River. If you go back to the map there, you see the Wei River. So it was a tributary of the Yellow River. So the dynasty was divided into two periods. That is the Chao dynasty. It was divided into two. The first one, it was the West Chao. It was there between 1045 to 221. And the Eastern Chao, which was there between 771 to 221 BC as well. So the Zhou dynasty effectively ruled China in Western Chao period. So these ones, they were effective during that Chao or the Western Chao period. So the Eastern Chao period was weakened by the barbarians' invasion from the north and the west, who attacked the city of Hao and murdered the ruler of that Chao. So this forced the royal family to flee eastwards again. So they left that one. So the rule took about 500 years. So the kings were almost powerless because the nobles assumed more power. So what are the contributions? What are the contributions of the Zhou dynasty? So they adopted and preserved the Shang civilization, like lighting systems or the ancestral worship, and again reading of the oracle bones and the division of society into major groups. So they preserved the Shang civilization in that way. And also the concept of mandate of heaven, it was also maintained. So the Chinese believed that as long as a dynasty provided good governance, it enjoyed the mandate of heaven. And if they became weak and corrupt, and as well as cruel, the heaven would withdraw their mandate. And also the sign of withdrawal. The sign of withdrawal were incidences of floods, famine, as well as the catastrophes. So that is to say, the signs of withdrawal, to say when the heavens, the mandate of heaven, they have withdrawn from a particular dynasty, then they could see the floods, famine, as well as some catastrophes. Then the people could say, no, the heavens have withdrawn their mandate from this rulership, or from this kingship, or from this dynasty. So that was the concept of mandate of heaven. So they contributed also on governance or government. So they established the feudal system or feudalism, whereby they granted the royal family and the military leaders the land in exchange for royal military service to the ruler and protection for the people living on the land. And again, they fought over power and land and even wealth. So this weakened the kingdom's control. So the Chao rulers called themselves the sons of heaven, the sons of heaven, and they kept the gods at the center and performed the rites to ensure fertility of the soil and control of the rivers. So we see to it that they established that feudalism, whereby people were given land on exchange of military service that would protect the kings as well as the people in that land. So the rulers, we are saying that the Chao rulers, they called themselves the sons of heaven. So they established the capital at Hao. At Hao. Remember, we said the barbarians, they came sometime and they defeated this city. And later it was at Luoyang. So in 771 BC, the empire was engulfed by the crisis due to miscalculation by the king. So later the king was killed by the invaders and they invaded that capital. So this made the remaining members of the royal family to fight. So this Chow or the Zhao, they obtained horses from Western nomads, which enabled them to have the cavalry in the military, and also they added the deadly weapon of the crossbar to their military weapons. And also the early Western Zhao supported was supported by the strong army, which was split into two. So there was the first group, which was the 6 armies of West and the 8 armies of the Shenzhou. So there were those categories into two. So the 6 armies, not that there were 6 soldiers, but 6 armies, a group of armies, number one, group two, up to group 6, and the other one, the 8 armies, 8 groups of armies. So they were in different regions. So the king was the commander-in-chief of the army. So the Zhou kingdom was divided into numerous districts that were called the Guo, meaning the statelet or principality. So they built large mound, dirt, and rock barriers uh, as barriers to their enemies. So this led to the erection of the Great Wall of China. So today, one famous thing for those who go to China is the Great Wall of China. So in the picture there, what you see is the Great Wall of China. So it all started with the Zhou dynasty. They were building those things with an aim of. Another contribution is the economy. So this dynasty witnessed the knowledge of iron working. So the stone, wooden, bronze tools were replaced by the ox-drawn iron plows. So those plows, they increased food production. So the rulers, they encouraged the peasants to grow new crops such as the soya beans. So soya beans were grown in abundance during that time. So the large-scale irrigation system also took place during that time. For example, they built the Grand Canal and also contributed to the increased food production. And also trade expanded, and the Chinese started using money for the first time. So they were trading boosted their economy, and in trade we are saying that they started to use money. So they were using the coins that had a hole at the center. So the currency system made trade easy. The use of money made that trade easy. And during this era, the Chinese also grew the silkworm and the mulberry trees where those worms, the silkworms, were fed. So women were taking care of those silkworms and they were weaving cloth. The silk trade, we are saying that it became a popular and connected the area with the Middle East. So after those women, after they harvest that silk from the silkworm, then they were weaving the cloth, and that one, it was one major trade item with the Middle East. So they were going to the Middle East, and due to the availability of extra food in the area, the population of the Chinese also grew tremendously. And even today, China is highly populated. It's highly populated up to this day. And again, arts is another contribution of the Zhou dynasty, arts and philosophy. So the books were written and bounded during this period of the Zhou. So books were made by binding the thin strips of wood and bamboo. They were bound together and they used brush or ink to draw the characters. So one of the greatest Zhou works is the Book of Songs, which has the poems on the economic and social and political issues. And there is also another book that is written by Sun Tzu. Sun Tzu. So this one is a classical work that is called The Art of War. The Art of War, which advocates the dexterity, the intelligence, and the balance of or in conformity with the nature, rather than the mere use of brutal or brute force. So it was written during this period of the Zhou. And this book, The Art of War, is still popular in the world today. So it has been translated even to many, many languages, even in English, So let us look at the decline of the Chao or Zhou dynasty. Number one is the rebellion from the states. So there were fights in the area and later challenged the Zhou authority. So Qin emerged the powerful state and defeated and united all into one empire around 221 BC. So the Qin state became one powerful state that defeated the Zhou authority. So the Qin dynasty is recognized as the first empire because it began the new time that was called the imperial China. So imperial means the empire of, the empire of.